probably like the second, maybe third situation that I probably shouldn't have walked away from. And that was the thing that struck me, like I must have a different purpose. And I had never considered that I could hurt somebody else in my drinking. And I know that sounds so ridiculous. Like, obviously, everybody knows drinking and driving is dangerous,
Yeah.
but I did it for 15 years, like, and I never hit anything.
Right.
So that thought to me wasn't dangerous. I never thought of driving as dangerous or whatever. I was just drunk, but
Same.
um,
And
but
I
that
think
was
it's
really terrifying to me, because it's like I didn't care if I hurt myself.
right.
Obviously, at the state I was, I would have loved to have died.
Hmm.
I didn't care if I hurt myself, but the thought that I could hurt somebody else, and then all the what ifs. What if he had a kid in his back seat?
Mm.
What if I was on a side road and he was on the sidewalk, not even in a car? All of those things mashed together created
Hmm.
my rock bottom moment. And all of that was literally probably 30 seconds.
Right.
All those thoughts was
Yeah.
probably 30 seconds of like, oh my gosh, like this is not an option in my life anymore, period.
It's kind of just struck me when you said you hadn't considered the possibility of hurting other people physically. Had you considered the fact that you were hurting other people in your life, maybe not physically, but emotionally?
Oh, it took me a couple of years into recovery to realize that.
Same. I had no concept that
Well,
that was even a possibility.
I also didn't live close to any of my people, right? Like I left where I was born and raised and I moved to Los Angeles, and I was in Los Angeles for a decade, right? So I really, like, my family didn't know much about anything. Now, at the same time, when I moved back to my hometown, that's when my drinking really went crazy out of control. And I just shielded them from everything. I mean, they didn't know anything. They didn't know ever when I had been arrested. They didn't know ever when I had ended up in the hospital for some random thing. They just didn't know anything. And I think it was years into my sobriety and my mom going with me for speaking engagements because we're kind of a package deal.
Yeah.
And, like she always, especially speaking engagements, like she would always go to
Oh, of
those things with
course.
me.
Yeah.
And I think it was probably 4, maybe 5 years into my recovery before she actually heard all the
Mm,
details and really knew all the things because I really just hid it from them. I
got
hid
it.
my whole life from
Yeah.
them.
So we wake up the next morning after the accident. So what did you put into place then? Was that the last drink?
So that was not the last drink.
As
So,
we do.
yeah, right. 3 days later, so me and some of my friends had bought concert tickets like months before all of this happened. And I locked myself in my apartment. Now, my face was all busted up from my accident. Like, I face planted the steering wheel of my car, so my nose was broken. But my nose wasn't broken in the way where you get two black eyes. My nose was broken at the bottom, so the entire lower half of my face was swollen.
Oh.
And then I had two cracks in my head, like up at my hairline.
Yeah.
So I was pretty busted up, and I just laid low for 3 days. And then it was time for this concert. And all my friends were like, Angela, you have to get out of the house. Like, you can't just stay in there forever. Let's just go to the show. We've had these tickets for months. It'll be fine. And I'll tell you a pivotal mistake and learning lesson. I assumed that everybody would understand I wasn't drinking because I just had this major catastrophe,
Yes. Right.
right? So it's like they have to understand I'm not drinking. So I thought, okay, they were like, we don't care what you look like. It's just you have to get out of the house. So I go. The concert was about an hour away from my house. I didn't drive, right? And I had a second car. But I was really freaked out after my accident. I
Yeah,
was
of
really
course.
scared to drive. So they picked me up. So I was trapped. I didn't have anybody that was
Oh.
willing to drive that distance and pick me up, right? I had already burned all those bridges. And I didn't have, $100 for a cab ride home.
Yeah.
So we're standing in line, and my buddy's like, okay, I'm going to get drinks. And I had the strength one time to say, I'm not drinking. And I looked at him like he was crazy. I was like, I'm
Yeah.
not drinking. And he looked at me and said, Angela, I know you'll drink if I get you something to drink, so you may as well just order what you want.
Ugh.
And in that split second, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Am I going to go through this night and be miserable because I'm sober and everybody's drunk? Are they going to be mad at me? I have no escape. I have no way out. So I just made the executive decision. I was like, fine, I will drink and get through this night, and this is it. And I will never be in this position again.
Mm.
I will never not have my car. I will never assume that my friends understand I'm not drinking. Like,
Right.
I will always protect myself. So it was a major, major moment in a lot of ways. And I woke up the next morning, and the first thought that went through my head is I was like, thank God that's over.
Mm.
Thinking about my drinking life because I knew it was done. I didn't even want to drink that night. It was
Right.
like survival.
Survival.
And
Yeah.
it was just survival. Like I just had to get through that night. And of course I drank like a crazy person and everybody had fun. But I was so grateful to be back in the safety of my home and to know that my drinking life was coming to an end.
Hmm. Isn't there that sense of relief
Oh,
where it's just like
so
everything
much.
that has been catching up to us for years or decades in some cases, just that sense of relief is indescribable.
Absolutely.
Oh,
So I laid low. I continued to detox, right? I had a pretty, I wouldn't say terrible detox. Like I basically felt like I had the flu. I mean, I definitely didn't feel great, but it
yeah,
wasn't horrible. I did not know back then that that was dangerous to detox at home by yourself. I had no idea.
right.
So I detoxed. I think it was about a week, and I went to my first AA meeting. And I knew that's what I needed to do. I mean, this was a long time ago, too. We didn't have other options back then either. Like now there are all these other things and all these other programs. But back then we didn't have that stuff. Like AA was kind of the only house on the block. So that's where I went. I found a spot that was close to my house that had a lot of meetings every day. And I settled in, and I don't think I skipped a meeting for 5 years.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah, I
Can
was
I ask
in.
your sobriety date?
Yeah, January 7th, 2006.
Nice.
I think around 9 or 10 months sober, I met a group of people who ended up being my tribe. That was my crew. And it was incredible. I mean, there were like 7 or 8 of us that were really tight. And we did everything together. We did service work together. We went to meetings together. We had barbecues at each other's houses. We started a private big book study with our sponsors at one of
Mm.
our houses. We had weekly TV shows that we watched together. Like we just really created this incredible circle of trust and love and acceptance and fun. And I never even thought about isolating.
That is a great point. Without the community and the people that I surrounded myself with in those sort of formative years of early recovery,
Mhm.
we talk about different paths to recovery and, 12 step is part of my story and part of yours, but it may not be to a lot of listeners, and we all find our own path and road to where we need to get. But I think a common theme that I hear in hundreds of stories that I've heard is the sense of community and being with those sort of like-minded people who understand and can support us.
There is nothing like connecting with another person with addiction. Like we connect on a different level with each other than we connect with the rest of the world. And because we're living with this thing that you can only really understand if you have it.
Yes.
So it's like as soon as somebody tells me they're sober, the love and compassion I have for that person is so different than a random stranger that I meet somewhere. It
Yes.
just is different. And I just wouldn't trade it for the world. I mean, there's so much magic in those relationships. And I say to everybody, like, yeah, like you said, 12 steps is a part of my story. It's a part of your story. I love 12 steps,
Yeah.
but I don't care if somebody else doesn't love it.
Right.
Like you have so many options now. My thing is, I just want you to do something rather than do nothing.
Mm.
find something that fits for you and be willing to challenge yourself a little bit, because it's not going to be comfortable. We're all terrified when we walk into our first meeting, whether it's 12 steps or not,
Right. Yep.
that's a terrifying moment for all of us. We all have social anxieties. That's the other thing I hear. Oh, but I have terrible social anxiety. I'm like, what the hell do you think
Don't
the
we
rest of
all?
us are going through?
Right.
Yeah. Like we all know that feeling. So be willing to challenge yourself a little bit and just know going in, it's going to be uncomfortable.
Right.
And you're okay. Nobody has ever died from being uncomfortable. We can survive all of those things, but find something. You have to find something, and you have to find people to connect with.
That's a great segue, because there is this sort of new generation of folks who are finding recovery through this beautiful online recovery community. And you and I are lucky enough to be a part of it. And we had mentioned earlier that, the idea or sort of we got the ball rolling on our podcast as sort of service work based on our 12-step work. So let's talk a little bit about the early years of your podcast and sort of the idea behind it.
Oh, it's such a crazy journey. But yeah, like I was saying in the beginning, I started my podcast just to share information. That was really my thing. I also own men's sober living houses. And like we touched on, also I do interventions,
Yeah.
right? So my phone and my inbox are blowing up nonstop. There's no shortage of people that need help, and families that need help with their adult children or young children or spouses. And I thought, I'm going to start sharing information and sharing stories in a podcast format, so that when people reach out to me, because I get the same questions all the time over and over, it's kind of the same stuff. I
Yeah.
was like, I want to be able to say, oh, you know what? I did a whole podcast on that. Go listen to this. And
Episode
I could,
25.
yeah, right. And I could like steer people to get more information, and that's really how it started. And I was kind of recruiting my friends and having them come on and just talk about recovery with me. In the beginning, also before coronavirus, I recorded all of my episodes in person because I traveled so much anyway. So whenever I was going to a city, I would like go on Instagram and I would find other recovery people and other recovery influencers in that city. And I'd be
Oh,
like,
I
hey, I'm
love
going to be in
that.
town for 2 days. Do you want to record a podcast with me? And
Yes.
it was a blast.
I
I
love
mean,
that.
it was really unpredictable also,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I was recording in Los Angeles, and I don't know, I think I had like 6 people I was recording that day. And one of my good friends owns a treatment center out there, and he gave me his outpatient office to record in.
hmm
So we're sitting there, and literally the window to the street, to Vine Street, right? World famous street.
Yes.
Vine is right outside the window, and the sidewalk's right there. And it's no secret that LA has its share of homeless people. So
Yes.
I'm sitting here and I'm recording where I think it was Wes Gear who played in the band Korn, right? And
Yeah.
we're having this great conversation and we're cracking up. And all of a sudden, this dude lays down outside the window with his little transistor radio and starts singing Black Magic Woman. And it's like in my episode, like there's no way to cut it out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I always had like these weird little things pop up. Or one time we were recording in the hotel, and their hotel music like came across
Oh,
in my
yes.
podcast. You could hear it through the whole thing. But it was so much fun, and this incredible energy, getting to meet everybody in person. And it was really fantastic. And I think I'm going to start doing more of that again too, because
Sounds really
it
fun.
was really phenomenal. But then all of a sudden, I had 1 month, in podcast world, you never really know if you're doing well.
Yeah.
It's like, what is good? Like, how many downloads is good? So you don't really know. It's like, is it good or does it suck? Like, I don't know. But what I knew was my downloads were getting bigger every month.
Mm.
It was growing every month. And I had somebody tell me, a more experienced podcaster said to me once, he's like, wow, that's really good. He said, what that usually means is people are coming back and they're sharing episodes. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I think I was about 8 months in, and I had a huge jump in downloads one month.
Yeah.
And that was the thing that really kind of kicked me into gear, where I was like, oh, like this could be something. And it took me a long time to get there. You know, I just kept plugging away and doing episodes, and I did all my own post production and still do a lot of the time.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a plan around it, right? I just, when people kept showing up and then I started getting reviews and all this stuff, it fueled me to do more and do better. But for me, like I was already coaching. Was already a life coach and working with families and working with people with addiction. Like that had already been my profession for a long time. So all of a sudden they come out with the term recovery coach. And I was like, oh yeah, sure. I've already been a life coach for 10 years. Is that what I've been doing
for a decade?
Yeah, like let's do it, you know? Perfect fit.
Yeah.
But, you know, also like a good alcoholic, I don't necessarily like to follow other people's rules. So after working with so many people for so many years, I really put together a curriculum that I know works, you know, from my own recovery and from working with so many people. I just put together kind of my own thing that I know is successful and works and is supportive. But the number one thing in that is still connection. Right. You have to have your tribe. And again, I don't care if it's 12 steps or not, but you have to have a tribe, you know? Usually when people don't want to do any program, it's because they don't want that accountability, because they know that's leveling up. Like when you walk in and commit to that, that's leveling up. And like, then you're responsible for your recovery.
So true. Angela, tell us where we can find you online if people are moved today by your story or want to work with you in the future.
Absolutely. Always easiest to find me on anything at Addiction Unlimited. We have a beautiful, vibrant Facebook group that's full of love and support always. The podcast, like you said, is Addiction Unlimited, and you can kind of find all the information that you will ever want.
Angela, I so appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening today, friends. Hopefully you heard something that resonates with you. And if we help just one person, our job is done. Make sure you check today's show notes for all the information discussed in the episode and how to connect with our guest. And as always, check us out at thesobrietydiaries.com, youtube.com/Nate Kelly, and on Instagram at the Sobriety Diaries Pod. Please head over to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the show, friends. It truly helps other people to find the show, and in turn, we can help more people. Until next Wednesday, try your best not to drink and be good to yourselves. Bye, everyone.